right, Hayden Winks is here. We've never created content together, and I'm a huge fan of him and his show. He is the co-host of the Underdog football show with Josh Norris, our buddy. What's going on, man?
I'm doing well, recovering from a bachelor party this last weekend, which we broke the bad rule of 3 nights. I'm more of a 2 nights guy. The third night's always going to be a grind.
No, where was it?
In Mexico. So then, like the last day, you're crossing the border, so you're sitting in traffic the whole time. So it's no good.
I mean, you can accomplish most of what you want in one night of hotel stays. Just get there early, leave the night, because no one actually even wants to stay the second night.
No, they don't.
Really
and
don't.
People were coming in and out, so it was like somebody's first night. So they're trying to rally the group together, and then all of a sudden you're like, I've already done my first night. Like, this is my third night, so you can't be coming in here and telling me to turn it up again.
Well, it's like the end. It's like the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure thing, where it's like you see the people from the past, like, hey, don't forget to set your watch. Like you see like the earlier version of you, and the people who come in like the second night, you're like, oh, I remember when you were fresh faced.
Yes.
And I remember like when I was excited about it and wanted to have my first beer, like, and then by the second night, you're like, I'm done here. And the other thing is, and I not to sort of armchair quarterback this, any bachelor party with different groups of people, you've already lost. That was I went on a couple before I got married, and it's like, oh, these are my high school friends, these are my college friends, these are my work friends. Like, no. We're either going to make the group very small or we're picking one group. Because you get 3 big groups, the whole thing is a complete disaster. That's my number one tip on bachelor parties.
Yeah, we ran into that this last time as well. So yeah, I chose the high school friend group and did not regret that a single bit.
100% correct. All right, we're doing the Leap Show, my favorite show to do around this time of year, because this is mandatory mini camps. We're reading all the tea leaves, and like the worst analysis right now, Hayden, is like oh, this guy's jacked, incoming like Pro Bowl season. Like it's all we have. But there's a lot of data from last year. There's a lot of like, we know the roles now. We pretty much know who the teams that contend should be. There's only some minor, like, the roster spots. It's really only like what veterans have aged out of a spot, who's going to make it on special teams, surprise cuts as far as draft picks goes, or whatever, young players, second year guys. But really, those don't really determine who's going to win the Super Bowl, who's going to win a division, or who's going to make an all pro team. So we're pretty safe to start doing the Leap Show right now. So one coach, one team, one player, could be any bucket. We will start, Hayden, wherever you want to start. Give us your number one leap. And by the way, just so the listener knows, that they haven't listened to it before, like we did. The first time we did it was like I did it with Mays years ago, and then we did it. I vividly remember when we started doing outside guests, we did it with Evan Silva, and he would do he did some great ones because he also had bets. But it's like, leap can be anything. So a leap can be bad to good. It can also mean good to great, but it can also mean great to MVP. And like that's it. It's any kind of leap. So just so the listener knows, there's not anything except a leap. It could be defined in any way. Just so the listener knows the parameters. Hayden, you have the floor.
So I picked one mainstream one and then kind of 2 more under the radar ones. And let's start with the mainstream one. And let's go with the team. And this is going to be the Texans. And I'm going to try to do this whole blurb without mentioning CJ Stroud, because hopefully everyone knows how good CJ Stroud is. But I'm going to look at the rest of the offense. And last year, the Texans, they were 29th in short yardage success rate. The offensive line was injured. They were bad. The running back group was also bad. So they bring in Joe Mixon. I'm not sure how much he's going to really change the offense, but Titus Howard missed time. He was going from tackle to guard. Kenyon Green, that was their first rounder a couple years ago, did not play the whole season. We're not even sure if he's going to start this year. Juice Scruggs, drafted as a center, was playing left guard. All of a sudden, like, this entire offensive line was going back and forth, and they really were never able to get into a rhythm running the ball. And that was a problem for the Texans for a couple of reasons. First, they were 4th in under center runs. Like, this was like a foundation of the offense, and they were not able to do that. We saw that in the red zone touchdown rate, where they're only 16th despite having Stroud and those weapons. They were just not able to run the ball this year. Hopefully with better offensive line play, they'll get that thing figured out. And then also last year, early on, they were trying to run the ball so often. From weeks 1 through week 8, they were 31st in neutral pass rate at 39%, which is very, very low. Then they figured out Stroud is amazing. Nico Collins is amazing. Tank Dell is amazing. And then from week 9 on, they were 12th in neutral pass rate, which I think was probably a pretty big leap given the coaching staff. We have a defensive-minded head coach. The offensive coordinator is most likely going to be coming from a Shanahan system that wants to be able to like run the ball very frequently. But going into this year, like they're just going to pass the ball like crazy. Like that's why they bring in Steph Diggs. So I think some of the issues that we have with the Texans early on last season, like those are just completely behind us at this point. So I think the Texans have a chance to go from like a very fun wild card story to being like a legit contender with the Chiefs this year.
If they contend with the Chiefs, it's because of what? Is it the roster improvements? Is it just Stroud playing out of his mind? I mean, not out of his mind, because he's been doing this now for over a year when you go back to the Georgia playoff game. Like, what is the actual sort of path to Chiefsdom?
So I think the system going from balanced to pass heavy, I think is going to be a huge thing. Like, for example, last year, I believe they're only 21st in 11 personnel. This year, when you have Steph Diggs, who I think is probably going to play the slot, like Tank Dell, he's an outside guy. Nico Collins, like one of the best X receivers out there. I think they're going to just pass the ball more. And I think that's going to jack up the efficiency automatically. And then to me, it was just the injuries. Like last year, like even Tank Dell missed the last half of the season there. And then I mentioned all the offensive linemen. Derek Stingley didn't play until basically week 10 last year. He was pretty impressive overall. So I think there's some, then you have Will Anderson going into his second year. So I think there's just like some players that were like, we saw flashes of that just, we didn't see them enough. So I think injury luck would help them out. I'd also just think that them just passing the ball like crazy is going to be really impressive. And I think the last note is Nico Collins. I'm not sure if people understand how good of a wide receiver he is. Like he was obviously fantastic for fantasy, but last year I'd come up with this metric called man coverage composite score, which is like taking all of the fancy metrics that we look at, put them all together. He was number 1 in first downs per route run against man coverage, number 2 in yards per route, and then number 2 in PFF grade last year. Like he is a huge guy that can run really fast. And then after the catch, he was automatic there as well. So Stroud with these 3 wide receivers, and then hopefully with better offensive line play running the ball, I think that's going to be how they close the gap.
Also, Collins is really good against zone too. Like I saw one of those charts. It was like, zone man. You may have made it actually. And Collins is in the upper right quadrant with like the guys that we consider to be the alphas of the sport. And so when people saw that contract, like, wait, it's only one good year. Yeah, it was an unbelievable year, and it was the first time he had someone throwing to him that wasn't an insurance adjuster. Okay, so I actually have a AFC South team I want to shout out, but I'm gonna hold that until you're done. What are your other 2 hipster teams?
Well, the other hipster teams I was looking at, like I could have made a very similar case for the Packers, who just like making the same exact leap as the Texans, just a bunch of players that need to gel as well. The Colts were on my list. I've got a feeling that could be the team.
I got the Colts. The Colts are mine.
Go for it.
All right. So this is not purely an Anthony Richardson thing. It's not. Because first of all, Shane Steichen, and I was surprised. So I went on Mina's pod about a month ago, and I just as a throwaway line said, by the way, the Colts are better than the Jaguars. I got a lot of heat for it. And I was surprised because they had the same record last year with Gardner Minshew playing quarterback.
Yep.
And I think that the Jaguars fans, and I understand this, the Jaguars fans have put a lot of stock into their offseason, which is fine, going out and getting a lot of bigger names that look good on our lads. And I do think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be fine. I don't think that in the AFC South, which is getting better every single year, that they're where they were a year ago. So let's start here. First of all, Anthony Richardson did beat Houston in week 2 last year. Obviously, you mentioned that they were a different team last year, at that point last year, but he did have 2 rushing touchdowns. There's a metric called perfectly covered plays, which essentially, if the listener doesn't know, is where the defense does their job. How good did you do? And in that small sample size, poor Richardson got hurt first month of the season. Richardson was the best player in the NFL there because he can make stuff happen. He's one of the most athletic quarterbacks testing-wise in history. Shane Steichen seems like a really good coach. And then all of and this is more of your purview than mine, all of like the fantasy drop-back numbers, per drop-back stuff, like he's on Josh Allen's path as far as just the first month of the season. So this is all very small sample size. But then you look at the way that they draft, and Chris Ballard drafts, and this I don't clip this and don't like assume Chris Ballard drafts like I would draft, and that's a good thing. Like, to me, he drafts athletes that take a couple of years to develop. He understands that not every and I'm not talking about the quarterback position. I'm talking about all 22 positions. He looks at combine data and has ruthless standards for what a Colts player is going to be, and that stuff pays off in year 2 and year 3. His draft classes are always aging better than they appear in the first year. And there's athleticism all over the field, and with a good coaching staff, which is what Shane Steichen has, they're always, you bet on athleticism and figure everything else out later. And that's the best model in the sport. I'm not saying they're going to win the Super Bowl or anything like that. I'm saying they're going to go from a 9-win team to comfortably a 12-win team. Ooh. And then it comes down to whether or not the Texans win more. This is not an anti-Texans take. I think the Texans might win 14 games, for God's sakes. I'm just saying that the Colts are going to make the leap into legitimate, I don't think anybody's on the Chiefs tier, but legitimate second tier AFC contender.
Yeah, they're going to be one of the most fun teams to watch, and that athleticism that you're talking about, you see them, the pass rush win rate, they were number 5 last year. And I think that most fans would not be able to name a single Colts pass rusher. And that's just because they sorted by the athletic ability and then just let them cook. So yeah, I think the secondaries could be the issue that the Colts run into, but offensively,
some athletes back there too. Hopefully they hit.
So but the wide receiver group is coming together now. I think that Michael Pittman is a perfect underneath guy. Josh Downs, I thought, had great ball tracking and a little bit more ability to win downfield than the typical slot wide receiver. And then A.D. Mitchell, another fantastic athlete, kind of a wild card, falls to the second round. He potentially could be replacing Alec Pierce, who didn't bring a whole lot to the table in his first couple seasons there. And then, like you mentioned it, for fantasy purposes, I mean, Anthony Richardson, number 1 last year in fantasy points per dropback. It's special stuff. And there was a couple of times where he nearly scored a touchdown inside the red zone and then got injured or whatever the case may be. So those numbers can even go higher than that. And like you said, Shane Steichen to me, very interesting, because even last year with Gardner Minshew, who I think is a fine backup quarterback, exciting to kind of get in there as your backup guy. But as a starter, nobody's running into pressure more often than he is. And they had to really scheme around him. And one way they did that was just RPO, throw the ball a slant mostly to Michael Pittman repeatedly to kind of structure the offense. But they would run with pace, and they're at least working with the confines of the players they have. I think this year, throwing the ball deep downfield with Anthony Richardson and potentially A.D. Mitchell, that could be the missing ingredient that the Colts offense did not have last year. And even the offense last year was middle of the road. And Jonathan Taylor wasn't himself. Gardner Minshew was a starting quarterback. Josh Downs was in and out of the lineup at times. The offensive line looked at least okay after a really weird season the year prior. Maybe that's a Shane Steichen thing as well. So yeah, the Texans and the Colts all of a sudden turned this AFC South that was by far the worst division in the sport into at least having some intrigue this year.
Completely agree. I love it. All right, I will. I'm trying to think if we should do coach or player next. Let's go coach. Let's leave player best for last. We're going to do a coach. I actually picked a coordinator, but you can go wherever you want with it. You got the floor.
I also picked a coordinator. I'm going Drew Petzing, the Arizona Cardinals offensive coordinator. So 37 years old. He started out at Harvard and at Yale, and then just worked his way up through the systems. He was mostly just recently with the Browns. And last year he had a roster for the first half of the year that was fairly competitive without having any star talent. Maybe Trey McBride was entering into that mix, but Marquise Brown wasn't himself playing through injuries. Even if he was himself, the quarterback play in terms of accuracy, I thought was maybe the worst in the league last year. And all of a sudden, Drew Petzing was able to run the ball. James Conner last year was fantastic. As a team, they were 9th in yards before contact per carry. PFF said the run blocking unit was 26. So you have this completely different ranking. And I think that's mostly scheme related. They were number 1 in big run rate last year. James Conner's not Devon Achane and just ripping off big plays typically. There was something foundational about the run game that kept offenses or defenses on notice. And then this year, all of a sudden, he's going to get Marvin Harrison in there, Trey McBride into year 2, and then Kyler Murray, who I didn't think was completely himself last year, but they were doing at least some under center stuff with Kyler Murray, which was basically a first of his career. And now he gets the entire offense. or the offseason. So I think that Drew Petzing is going to come in here and be one of the guys that's going to get head coaching interviews next year if the Cardinals can go from like last year, one of the worst offenses, to maybe they can be an league average offense this year. And I think that a lot of other owners are going to look at Kyler Murray, young player, just dropped an elite wide receiver in there, and then all of a sudden could have a pretty intriguing offense. So I would not be surprised if Drew Petzing is one of these offensive coordinators from this year that gets head coaching interviews and maybe even a gig next offseason.
Interesting thought. I had not thought about that. Not on my radar at all. A couple things about it. Number one, the only thing that gives me pause is the NFC West is going to be brutal.
Yes.
It's going to be brutal. And those guys are going to take some lumps, especially early. But I completely agree. If you do any sort of job, not to beat a dead horse over this, but like, this is what I thought was so disappointed in when the Cliff Kingsbury hire happened, is like, if you're a defensive head coach, you should be selling coordinator hires on, if you do an above average job with our quarterback, with our young quarterback, and Kyler isn't necessarily a second contract guy, but like, you will get head coaching jobs, head coaching interviews at the very least. And I think that Drew Petzing work with Stefanski. It's a scheme that everybody wants to run. Everybody understands where the league is going. Like I completely agree. It's a really intriguing option, especially if Marvin Harrison breaks out early.
Mm-hmm.
Are you expecting? Like, it's so funny because have you ever heard the Joel Bushbaum, Bill Belichick story about how this old draft guru passed away? Belichick loved him, and they were going through his projections, the draft guru's projections his rookie year, and Randy Moss had said 1,600 yards, a trillion touchdowns, and Bill Belichick was like, "Oh, is that for his prime?" And they're like, "No, that's what he's going to get this year."
Yeah,
and the story gets less and less interesting as we go on because we don't remember that no one had those numbers back then. Rookie receivers used to really struggle. Randy Moss was a phenomenon. Now everybody from freaking Ohio State comes in and has 1,100 yards.
Yep.
As soon as they step on the field. That's just how modern offense works. And just kind of funny to me. Are you expecting Marvin Harrison to be a year one, just throw him out there and he's going to get a ton of yards, ton of touchdowns guy?
Yeah, I think that he's going to be pretty involved immediately just because the lack of the weapons behind him. I think Trey McBride, they used him everywhere. He's very physical and actually adds a little bit of yards after the catch ability. That caught me off by surprise. Greg Dortch is the slot receiver, and that guy always gets open for whatever reason. He's another guy that you just sort by the charts, and he's always up in the top right quadrant for whatever reason. But they need that number one go-to option, similar to how the Browns last year with Amari Cooper just repeatedly target him. And I think that he can do that. Right now on Underdog Fantasy, we're doing a bunch of drafts already, and he's the 14th overall player. So, I mean, he's a rookie. We haven't even seen him play. He's going ahead of very locked in alpha number one wide receivers like Nico Collins. The expectation around fantasy circles is Marvin Harrison is not only going to be good, he's going to be one of the top 10-ish productive players in the league. So I wasn't necessarily expecting that, but last year, just to kind of finish this point, last year, 30th in deep target catch rate. They were 28th in explosive passes last year as a team, the Cardinals were. That's where I think Marvin Harrison could make some contested catches. And I think that keeping the chains moving, I think that's going to be his bread and butter. And we'll see how athletic he looks against NFL wide receivers. That was the one thing you can nitpick is, I'm pretty sure he's really athletic, but we didn't get the elite athletic scores like you saw with Malik Neighbors and some other guys. But I think he's going to be totally fine this year. And I think that's what they need for Drew Petzing to be kind of this breakout coach.
Interesting. Okay. All right. My guy, don't misunderstand this. He had a great rookie season as a coordinator, but he's taking a lot of lumps right now. And he's about to have a campaign that is going to answer all of the questions because I think people looked at it the wrong way. It's Todd Monken. Todd Monken had one of the worst coaching games I've ever seen in my life relative to his ability. And there's a stat so I saw it in a Baltimore Banner article. I thought it was amazing. And then we had ESPN Stats and Info run the numbers. And it was actually worse, according to ESPN Stats and Info, than I thought. Here's the stat. This is against the Chiefs. There were 38 plays against light boxes against the Chiefs that the Ravens ran. Okay. How many times do you think they dropped back to pass on those 38?
Man, it felt like 33.
Yeah, it was 37.
Wow.
It was 37.
Man.
It was 37 times in 38 plays against light boxes. You could sell me on jail time. You could sell me on jail time.
Yeah.
But I think a couple things. Number one, and also, by the way, if Zay Jones fumble doesn't happen, completely different situation, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that upset me the most was they adjusted so well the week before because the Texans were blitzing. They adjusted so well. They went to quick game in the second half, and they just didn't do it against the Chiefs. It felt like they weren't watching the game, frankly, and they were just like, well, here's the game plan. And I understand like the old Bill Walsh thing about how don't ever change your game plan mid-game because you make the game plan when you have your most level head. Like, great. Having said that, this is the one time you change your game plan in the middle of the game, and it's against the Chiefs. And Monken has admitted, obviously, that they should have run the ball more. He took his lumps. I think and Mike Medina was on the show, 2 months ago and said scar tissue is important. I think Todd Monken is going to understand even more how to run that offense this year with Lamar Jackson. I thought Lamar Jackson was obviously a phenomenon last year. I loved watching him. I think you're going to see more running the ball. I think you're going to see them understanding what their strengths are. And then more than anything, when the most insightful thing I've heard, Steve Young came on the show in February, and he said, and I'm going to clip this out there. I don't think I've done it. He was basically just like, has anyone remembered that Lamar Jackson was in year one of learning a completely new offense and he won the MVP and somehow it's a failure? Mm-hmm. Somehow it's like, oh, wow, here's same old Lamar. Nope, because he looked as good as he has ever. And he was learning to play a new system. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, it's really scary.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we're going to see some things we've never seen before, and that's only going to be, unless we have these failures all the time, like Peyton Manning against the Patriots in 2004. Like sometimes you have a playoff game that changes your DNA for the better. That's what this is. Like I think we view failure too often as permanent in football, and it's like no, sometimes it helps, and I think you might see something like that with the Chiefs game this year for the Ravens.
And they immediately fix it by adding this guy named Derrick Henry, who I'm pretty sure is pretty interesting as a running back there. Just like seeing like that much power. Obviously, you saw it with Gus Bus, and he was productive last year. But like Derrick Henry, I think is going to give you even like more advantages in the pass game because they're going to have to like commit. Like we didn't see Lamar Jackson like have as much explosiveness as a runner last year. He's dropped weight this year. Like all of a sudden, we can get Derrick Henry in a system that he's not used to having a rushing quarterback. And then we'll also have Lamar Jackson back with a solidified stud running back there. The one question that I have with the Ravens is offensive line, like typically has been locked in because of injuries and because of trades this offseason. This is like the first time where I can remember where the Ravens have like at least some answers they have to figure out on the offensive line. But at the same time, the reason why the offensive line might have fallen back is because they spent a first round pick on Zay Flowers. They just did that with Rashad Bateman not too long ago. They obviously have to pay Lamar and Mark Andrews. So they have better skill talent just in general this year, but the offensive line is going to be a little bit more of a question mark than it was previously. But if Monken can figure that thing out, I do think that the Ravens, just like the Chiefs, the Texans, maybe even the Colts, Bills, and the Bengals, I mean, they can easily get hot and head over to the Super Bowl if Derrick Henry could really kind of change how defenses have to guard him.
Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words: Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. All right, your player.
I almost went with Anthony Richardson here. I felt like that was going to be too obvious.
That'd be too hypey. We cannot have that much of a hype train.
So let's go with a player who I think people are starting to fade and I want to like just double dip, and I'm going Geno Smith, and I want him to leap
Oh,
back into like the top 12 quarterbacks, because
I love this.
there were like, just for full disclosure, in fantasy circles right now, people are worried that Geno Smith is going to get benched for Sam Howell, and like I guess that could happen because it's a new staff. Like Geno Smith doesn't have any guaranteed money next year. But man, when I look at the deep into the numbers, Geno Smith last year I thought was pretty solid, and the environment, particularly the offensive line and maybe the offensive staff in general, weren't really giving him much help since he's been the Seahawks quarterback. Number one in completion percentage over expected last year when he was kept clean. Number one in big time throw rate on these deep targets. Number 7 in PFF grade. Number 9 in EPA. Number 7 in success rate. He avoids sacks at an elite clip, and he had to do that a ton last year because of the offensive line. So hopefully the right tackle can stay healthy. Hopefully they basically got rid of the entire interior. Hopefully that kind of gels. And if that is the case, I think that Geno Smith can just throw the ball around the yard basically as good as anybody from the pocket. And you bring in Ryan Grubb, who is also somebody I was going to bring up in the coaching segment. They pass the ball at elite clips, and they also disguise how they're getting to these like normal NFL concepts with motion, bunch sets at their wide receivers. They'll move their wide receivers around a little bit, and you have these 3 wide receivers that really complement each other. I think that JSN, while his numbers weren't very good, I thought that he flashed a little bit more on tape, in particular his like ball tracking and ability to win downfield. I thought was pretty cool, and even though they didn't do that very often. But I think that all of a sudden you get the offensive line fix and you get like just a better offensive play caller. I think that there's some numbers out there where Geno Smith, you can argue that he's like kind of on the top 10-ish styled quarterbacks, like right next to the Jared Goff, Tua type of quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins. Like, I don't know. I can make the case that Geno Smith is better than all those guys. And a lot of people in the fantasy circles think that he might get benched.
Wow. I love that. I'm also going to pick a quarterback. It's not to be top 12. It's going to be from bad to average.
Okay.
My leap is that Bryce Young is not that bad.
Uh-oh.
Bryce Young is just not that bad. First of all, you can't compare anything to Trevor Lawrence, Urban Meyer. Like, that was worst of all time career start. Like, nothing will ever be that bad.
Yeah.
But when I think about the sort of the situations that have been, like David Carr, obviously in Houston, was all bad. That ruined it. That truly ruined it. Just getting sacked that often. And oftentimes quarterbacks are failed instead of failing themselves. They are failed. They can put in situations, geography is destiny as quarterback. I've said it a million times. And there was, and I remember I've written about this, but like Richard Taylor basically said, he's an economist in Chicago. He basically said that like he doesn't even believe there's such thing as a quarterback prospect because the smart teams tend to hit on quarterbacks at a higher rate, and it's usually more nurture versus nature. And actually, when you start to think about that, it kind of plays with your mind. Like, how many really, like, sure, Mahomes is amazing, right? But what would Mahomes was just an improvement over Alex Smith, who was making the playoffs every year. It wasn't like a 13-game improvement. It was like a 3-game improvement. So anyway,
Andy Reid.
You start to you can stare into the abyss a little bit and be like, wait, is there such thing as a quarterback prospect? And then you kind of go crazy there for a while. Anyway, that's not what I'm arguing here. I'm not going to get into existentialism and whether or not quarterbacks are ever good.
Good.
It'd be funny if I did that. If I just got you on, it's like, what do you think about this crazy theory I have? I don't even have the theory. I just sometimes think about it.
You can play quarterback.
Yeah.
Who knows?
So anyway, I was looking at some of the stats last week and just saying, like, what can I glean from Bryce Young? First of all, getting credibility in the offensive line is really important. There's a stat in the receiving core, and that's important to a running game, all that stuff. But there's a stat, ESPN Analytics has the have you seen it, the open yak, stuff that basically tells you who the most open guys are, who's the best after the catch, all that stuff. Jonathan Mingo and DJ Chark, and again, I don't know the parameters of this. Jonathan Mingo and DJ Chark were two of the least open guys in football last year. Least open. Now I have a pretty good idea what that means. There's not a lot of separation going on here, okay? And there weren't, and you even watch the tape, there just weren't a lot of options for him. Was he the 30? I think he had the 4th worst yards per attempt in the history of football. Sorry, I don't think Bryce Young is the 4th worst quarterback of all time. Mm-hmm. I do not think that is the case. By the way, I believe Derek Carr is in that mix, is among the worst seasons of all time.
Jared Goff too.
Yeah, Jared Goff. I don't even think I'm talking about rookies. I think it's like ever. Like Jared Goff. Andrew Walters and Alex Smith. So you have a real. I'm not talking about yards per attempt. I'm talking about the worst rookie years ever. When you look at it, it's Goff, Alex Smith. I don't even know if it was Derek Carr's rookie year. I know he had a really bad yards per attempt season. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. When he gets rid of the ball in under 2.5 seconds, his pass rating is 20 points higher. 8 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. It's almost flipped when he holds on to the ball too long. You get him these layups, and I don't like. I just feel, and I know that people either memeing it or not, saying he can't see the middle of the field or whatever. I can show you some Alabama tape. He can get rid of the ball quickly over the middle of the field. He can do that. Okay. If you just get him some layups, I think he can be average this year, and I think eventually in his career, he will not be C.J. Stroud, but he can get to a place where he consistently gives you good football. I really do. I'm not writing off his career in Carolina. I think you get him layups, you keep him upright. I just still believe there's an NFL career buried in Carolina.
The first step was getting a number 1 target, and I think that's going to be Deontay Johnson and that man coverage composite score. Deontay Johnson last year was like top 12-ish, and I was kind of accounting for the quarterback play because obviously his numbers didn't live up to that, but when you adjust for like the on-target rate, Deontay Johnson was that guy. So I think that's going to be a layup target for Bryce Young. And when I went back and watched Bryce, because my buddy Josh, he loves Bryce Young as a prospect. He's a deep down Panthers fan. So we always have battles with this. I think that Bryce could be a average quarterback eventually because his accuracy is solid. He's a good scrambler. And when his feet are kind of in rhythm, he could actually make some nice touch throws, even to the perimeter as well. I think the hard part for Bryce Young, for me, is what is his elite trait that's going to get him into the top 10 mix? And I think last year it was the offensive line wasn't giving him enough time. There was pushback, and I didn't think that he had when comparing him to like Anthony Richardson, obviously, just that huge alpha arm talent, ability to take a hit and stay in there and deliver a strike. I'm not sure if I saw that enough with Bryce Young. So I guess it really comes down to like, what are we trying to compare him to? If it's on the scale of first overall pick, I'm nervous. If it's on the scale of how is he going to go compete in the playoffs, I'm a little bit nervous. If the scale is, can he be an average quarterback? Yeah, I think that he can be a Tua type of quarterback. He's going to scramble potentially a little bit better than Tua. But a lot had to go right for Tua to be as productive as he was. Obviously getting Tyreek, Waddle, and an elite play caller all went his way. I'm not sure if we're there yet with the Panthers, even if their offense just around him is going to be multitudes better than what it was last season.
Wow. Hayden Winks has made the case that if everything goes right, maybe Bryce Young can be a Tua-style quarterback. What an endorsement. Listen, Tua's about to make $50 million a year.
That would also make me nervous.
Maybe more. Yeah. I mean, yes, but that's another episode. That's another leap. Yes. That's a leap I don't want to take right now, is going into the Tua discourse. All right, Hayden, he's the co-host of the Underdog Football Show. He does great work with Josh Norris. I love everything that they do. They're doing it on podcasts. They're doing it on YouTube. Huge fan. Thanks so much, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on, and first time talking with you. It was a blast.